You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and a happy Sunday to you all. We are smack right at the middle of halftime right now, at least when I'm recording this, as the Falcons and Colts are going head-to-head right now. But we got to preview Monday Night Football action. So, without further ado, as always, like I say, dive in, comment down below, let me hear from you. Who do you like? Who do you dislike in this week's Monday Night Football matchup? We got two heavy hitters in the NFC as the Packers host the Philadelphia Eagles in Green Bay. A lot of just playoff implications riding on the line with this matchup here. Both of these teams also really wanting to get a win against a premier opponent within their conference. So let me hear from you. What do you like? What do you dislike? And as always, we're here for a good time. We're just making predictions. Don't take anything I say as gambling advice because I do not bet. We are here for a good time, and that's it. But looking at this matchup here, Eagles and Packers, Philadelphia, surprising a lot of people, I would say. Maybe not so much people within Philadelphia, but maybe on the outside looking in, opting not to trade wide receiver A.J. Brown. And I think that leads me to my first question for this game here. And that is essentially, does this mean that with some of the recent success we've seen from this passing attack in Philadelphia, maybe things have smoothed over? A.J. Brown maybe a little bit happier. He just simply wants to be a consistent part of this offense in making plays and helping this team win week in and week out. And I mean, you look prior to the New York Giants game where they just absolutely obliterated them on the ground when you had two rushers go for north of 100 yards, Saquon hitting 150 and Tank Bigsby crossing the 100-yard mark as well. They were actually looking like a really strong passing attack as both Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown were finding success. When you look from weeks 5 to 7, prior to that second Giants game, about 280 passing yards per game. Jalen Hurts was looking really accurate, hitting good deep balls, getting to his wide receivers. Devontae Smith having himself a career game within that span as well. So I'm very curious to see if this is more of a committal to the passing attack more than anything else, because at this point in the season, yes, Saquon Barkley coming off of the best game that he's had so far this season, it hasn't been consistent on the ground. A lot of defenses seem to be keying in on what they're trying to do with Saquon, so maybe this is the committal of we need to throw the football. Jalen Hurts, he's our guy. We pay him a lot of money. We need to get back to throwing the football. He's a capable passer. You go back to that first round going to the Super Bowl where they lost to the Chiefs a few years ago. That season, Jalen Hurts, this was before the whole tush-push thing was really going on. Jalen Hurts was a good thrower of the football, and he still is a good thrower of the football. So that's what I kind of am looking at here. And with Green Bay's defense coming into this one here, they're a top 10 unit in the NFL as things currently stand, statistically speaking. Nate Hobbs will be missing this matchup here, but a lot of the focus comes down to just how that pass rush works over there in Green Bay. Pretty solid unit, all things considered. Micah Parsons, obviously there, one of the best when it comes to generating pressure in the NFL. He's sitting on 44 this season, but he and Rashawn Gary being a big beneficiary of the addition of Micah Parsons. He's actually feasting because defenses are so worried about trying to plug up what Micah Parsons is trying to do. He's leading the team with 7.5 sacks to Micah Parsons' 6.5, so 14 combined between those two guys. Philly's O-line, at least statistically speaking, when it comes to pass protection, has not been great this season. They're actually bottom 10 in a lot of categories, whether it's pressure rate, sacks allowed, sack percentage. It's not been pretty, so I think this will be a really good test in two different departments. Obviously, how well they're able to protect Jalen Hurts, but if what we saw at the trade deadline was really Philadelphia committing to this passing attack that over the last month or so has really started to find itself. Again, it didn't look crazy by any means against the Giants the last time the Eagles played, but it didn't need to. They had nearly 250 yards. I think it was a little bit more than 250 yards on the ground rushing, so they didn't need to throw the football here. But with teams needing to throw the football in today's day and age in the NFL, it feels like that was a bit of a committal there. So I'm really excited for that. Now, if they do choose to lean into Saquon Barkley, I mean, that's certainly an option. The way things stand for Green Bay, though, they've been an excellent run defense. Once again, the addition of Micah Parsons has really helped out with that, with him setting the edge whenever you need him to come in and stop the run. But, I mean, you did find some success last week against New York. It was the best game you had. I just don't know if that's really something you're going to replicate against Green Bay, who has been like a top 5 run defense in the NFL. Yeah, they're coming off of a really ugly game against the Carolina Panthers as Rico Dowdle continues to run wild all over the NFL's run defenses. But I don't know if that's just a a blip in the season that has been a really stout run defense, or if maybe that is a sign of things moving forward, and that's something that maybe Philadelphia is looking at and going, what did Carolina do on the ground that maybe we could replicate coming off of a game where we had a ton of success ourselves running the football, where Tank Bigsby looked like an incredible reliever for Saquon Barkley, and maybe they start to lean into that. So there's definitely a couple of routes we can go here, and I think that there's a lot of intrigue just based off of what happened in both teams' previous game leading into this contest and just where these teams have stood throughout the majority of the season. On the other side, I'm looking at Green Bay's offense, and I'm very curious to see what this unit's going to look like here. There's a lot of questionable guys in the wide receiver room right now. Obviously, a ton of depth in this wide receiver room. It's a big wide receiver room as well. But Matthew Golden, Dontavian Wicks, and Savion Williams are all listed as questionable. You obviously won't have tight end Tucker Kraft as well. So there is a lot of just, if, ands, or buts that you're kind of looking at as far as who's going to be catching passes from Jordan Love this week. You, of course, still have Christian Watson. You, of course, still have Romeo Doubs in there. So you have some guys that you're not too worried about, and for what it's worth, Christian Watson has been a big piece of this passing attack since he's returned, making an impact each and every single week. A little bit of a quieter game for him last week, which is 2 receptions for 58 yards, but all things considered, you still have a solid group of guys going there, but I'll be curious to see who ends up lining up there, because I think Matthew Golden's been really good for this offense so far this year as he continues to learn and grow in this NFL system. I think he's definitely one of those guys with the elite speed that he has. Defenses have to key in on and keep an eye on, and it's opened things up for guys like Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson when he ultimately made his return as well. And for what it's worth, when you look at Philadelphia's defense this season, not even just against the pass, but just in general overall, they have not necessarily been all that threatening. Like, yes, you do have stars all over that defense, but the total numbers per game, when you look at it just game by game basis of what they're allowing, is not necessarily great. They're like flirting with bottom third totals in a lot of different categories. That being said, I think pass rush is probably one of the biggest concerns with Philadelphia. And if you can't disrupt Jordan Love with these receivers and with all these guys he could throw the football to, it ends up being a problem. And clearly Philadelphia has acknowledged that problem, because Brandon Graham came back. He decided to unretire. And while, he said, I do still feel like I have some in the tank, I bet you a piece of him, the competitor that he is, watching his team struggle to get after the quarterback, maybe had a little bit to do with that decision to unretire, and maybe Philadelphia going, hey, are you sure? We're still looking pretty good here, but we could definitely use some help. You sure you're done? If that conversation didn't happen, I'd be very surprised, and ultimately leading to that decision. And then there's, of course, the decision to opt to trade for pass rusher Jalen Phillips from the Miami Dolphins this past week. Clearly they knew they needed to bolster that group here, and Jalen Phillips, for what it's worth, is having a pretty good season, and somebody that I look at as, if he's healthy, he can be productive on the football field, and you've seen it throughout his career. It's just injuries have rattled him. So if this is a one-year rental, and he's currently in the middle of a season right now where he's having some career bests in certain statistical categories, this might be a massive upgrade for them on a team who just had pass rushers ripped away from them this past offseason, and it clearly showed as a problem for them. And then there's, of course, Josh Jacobs, if you decide to lean that way for the Green Bay Packers offense. The run defense hasn't been perfect in Philadelphia for a vast majority of the season, but they have tightened up the last couple of weeks. At the very least, you had a good game against Minnesota. You had a good game against the Giants now. So putting together a good couple of games back-to-back, holding teams under 100-yard rushing for the first time in both those games. Funny enough, this is a perfect time. If your run defense is figuring it out, you're starting to get into those colder months. You're going to be in Green Bay now as well for this matchup here. Maybe they're starting to figure it out. All things you need to consider, but I'll be very interested in seeing how both of these offenses opt to attack each other, because I think both defenses present certain challenges in certain ways, and it's one of those, it's not really clear, because Philadelphia has its weaknesses on defense, and Green Bay can kind of choose, depending on the health of all their receivers, how they decide to go about this game, whereas Philadelphia, the run game just not being as consistent as you'd like, especially considering what you did last year, and a passing attack that's starting to find itself in the last month. A lot of intrigue in just how these two teams will decide to deploy their offensive schemes. That being said, as far as who I think is going to win this contest, I mean, this one's as tight as the books and everyone says. I know we don't do betting here, but it's always stuff I like to look at. And, it's a 1.5 point game in favor of the Packers being the team hosting the Philadelphia Eagles. But I think it's one of those games where it's kind of a coin flip. The Packers have a couple of really ugly losses, and that tie against the Dallas Cowboys earlier in the season as well is not pretty for the resume, especially with the way the Cowboys have looked over the recent couple of weeks. And then Philadelphia, it's been interesting to watch. They had a little bit of an ugly stretch where they lost a couple of games, but they are 6-2, and I still look at Philadelphia's roster as one of the most talented in the NFL, and I think adding a Jalen Phillips and getting Brandon Graham back in the fold adds to that. And so that's one of those things that I do think Philadelphia in the long run is going to start to figure it out, as they do every year. It's a constant thing. Every single season, the early first half of the year, they're figuring things out. There's so many questions about them, and then come season's end, they're competing, and they're one of the best, not only in the NFC, but in the NFL. So this game definitely can go either way, but I think I'm going to go Philadelphia on this one. The Packers lost last week to the Carolina Panthers, and I know it's, every single week is a new week in the NFL. It doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one week in and week out, but that loss to the Carolina Panthers last week, I think, exposed some of the problems that Green Bay is currently dealing with, and they've had some really uncomfortably tight games against some really poor opponents, and I'm not saying Carolina's bad. That's just a game that nobody anticipated them losing, and they have, again, another loss to the Cleveland Browns, and that game against the Bengals was uncomfortably tight. That game against the Arizona Cardinals was uncomfortably tight, and those are not good football teams by any means. So I think I do like the Philadelphia Eagles in here, but I like them this is like a tight fight to the finish type of game. I'm taking Philadelphia 24-23, and it could be one of those situations where Philadelphia's kicking like a game-winning field goal, or maybe they take the go-ahead touchdown on the final drive of the game, one of those just nail-biters. But we've seen Green Bay in situations where they have close games, and they've been able to finish it off, and I feel like this is one of those scenarios where it ends up being like that, but Philadelphia, being a really good team in my eyes, being able to snatch away that victory and come away with the W, even if they are on the road in Green Bay. So let me know what you think in the comment sections down below. Who do you like, who do you dislike, and why? But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss out on all the football discussion all season long. We will do power rankings and recap the week on Tuesday, as we always do. So until then, I will see you all next time. Have a good one.